Marguerite Henry, author of Misty of Chincoteague and 58 other books about animals, was born in 1902 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, the youngest of 5 children. Her dad was a printer, and on Saturdays as a child, she'd visit his publishing house where she loved the smell and feel of the place and the sound of rows and rows of loud presses printing pages. But her young life was mainly housebound because when she was only 6, she came down with a disease called rheumatic fever that kept her stuck at home for much of her childhood, isolated from other children besides her siblings, but not from books, writing, or her imagination. One Christmas day when Margaret was 9 or 10, her dad gave her a little red desk of her own, stocked with all the necessary things a writer might need. What caught my eye first was my own cream pitcher, she later remembered, holding a bright bouquet of pencils. Brand new they were, with their erasers firm and unchewed, and all so freshly sharpened that to this day the memory of their cedarwood fragrance tickles my nose. The desk was installed in a corner of the family kitchen where Margaret spent many happy hours. At last I had a world of my very own, she later wrote, a writing world, and soon it would be populated by all the creatures of my imagination. And it was. She loved reading and writing, even sold an article to a magazine when she was just 11. She often wrote about animals such as dogs, cats, birds, foxes, and mules, but mainly her stories focused on horses. Margaret eventually went to a teacher's college near home, but left it in 1923 to marry a young man named Simon Henry she had met while on vacation with her sisters at a lake resort in upstate Wisconsin. Simon and Margaret moved to Chicago, and while Simon was at work, Margaret found that she had a talent for putting technical information in understandable terms, and wrote for trade magazines, and also wrote a series of articles for the Saturday Evening Post. But in 1940, her career really took off when she started writing children's stories. This was her first one, inspired by tales told to her by a Finnish couple who worked for her parents as cook and groundskeeper. 5 years later, she started writing about horses with a beautiful historical novel about the origins of the Morgan horse breed. Looking for an illustrator, she went to the library in search of the most beautiful drawings of horses she could find, and it was there she discovered the work of illustrator Wesley Dennis. Dennis had a knowledge and love of horses so great and so close to Margaret's own, says her biographer, that Margaret shared book royalties with him equally, which was a very rare and surprising arrangement. But it worked, and their ensuing partnership resulted in 20 more books, containing arguably some of the most beautiful, captivating illustrations of horses ever published in book form. 2 years after the book Justin Morgan Had a Horse, which would become a Newbery Honor book, she wrote Misty of Chincoteague, and it went on to become one of the most popular children's books of all time. Misty is a fact-based story that came about when Margaret's editor enticed her to go check out the swim, roundup, and auction that took place annually on an island off the coast of Virginia. Never one to be able to resist a writing assignment having to do with horses, Margaret traveled to Chincoteague and before long had met Grandpa Beebe, Paul, and Maureen. In this 1968 interview, Margaret describes the experience of seeing Misty for the first time. It might be a little hard to hear, but it's worth it to get this story in Margaret's own voice.
Yes, the first time I saw her, she was only 6 days old, and she had just made the swim from Chincoteague. And when she wasn't very successful in swimming across because she was only 6 days old. And so she tried to get a free ride across on the rump of her mother, and she slid off. And so during the swim, Paul Beebe jumped off a boat and went out and rescued her. And when they all finally arrived wet and dripping on the shore of Chincoteague, Misty just fell in a little heap on the sand, and she looked like a wet bath mat. And then her mother, who was the Phantom, made 4 fence posts of her legs and stood right over Misty to protect her from anybody disturbing her.
Then did you buy her at that time?
Yes, I bought her at the auction the next day.
And then you brought her here to Illinois?
I couldn't bring her right away because she was only a few days old. And I suggested to Grandpa Beebe that we bring her home in a station wagon and bottle feed her. And he said, "Margaret, I ain't gonna let you do it. 'Tain't fair to the mommy and 'tain't fair to the colt. But when she's 3 months old, why, Paul and Maureen and me, we'll put her in a crate and we'll send her to you." And that's exactly what they did.
So that you got her when she was
3 months old, and she was still no bigger than like a collie, about the size of a collie dog.
Well, then she wasn't hard to keep at your house.
No, she was rambunctious and full of pep, but she wasn't hard to keep. And we drove her in long reins first, and we had lots of fun training her. She came in the house for Christmas and Thanksgiving dinners, and she ate off of a needlepoint chair. We set her a dish of oats on a chair, and she never spilled an oat.
Later, Misty went on to do tours all across the country with Margaret, visiting schools and libraries and movie theaters, raising money to help rebuild the pony herd after a massive nor'easter storm. One that the real Misty, who was by then back at Chincoteague to have a foal, survived by taking shelter in the Beebe's kitchen. In 1948, the book Misty of Chincoteague earned Henry another Newbery Honor Award, and in 1961, it received the Lewis Carroll Shelf Award and was made into a feature film. Next came the sequels, Sea Star, Orphan of Chincoteague, Stormy, Misty's Foal, and in 1992, Misty's Twilight, all written first longhand in a 3-ring notebook. Marguerite Henry won the Newbery Medal in 1949 for King of the Wind and wrote many other animal stories as well. A Boy and a Dog, Variety of the Grand Canyon, and San Domingo, the Medicine Hat Stallion, are special favorites. Her last novel, Brown Sunshine of Sawdust Valley in 1996, is about a young girl who raises a newborn mule. The year after its publication, Marguerite Henry, aged 95, died of complications following a series of strokes. Margaret and her husband never had children, but she wrote back to every child who sent her a fan letter and developed real relationships with some of her readers, referring to them as her book children. And she, along with Wesley Dennis's illustrations, has fostered a love of horses in countless children around the world. And as an added gift to horse lovers everywhere, Margaret has ensured that the ponies of Chincoteague are famous and loved, not just in America, but globally. In fact, the next time you're on the coast of Virginia, you can visit Beebe's Ranch because it's been preserved and made into a museum thanks to Margaret. And guess what? You can even say hello to Misty and Stormy, who have been lovingly stuffed and preserved by a skilled taxidermist and stand patiently awaiting your visit.